Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, I'll spend some time with Gertrude by Hermann Hesse. This book was originally published in 1910. I read an electronic edition of a 1915 English translation by Adele Lewisohn. And my understanding is that this English translation was the first of the Hesse books to be published in English. So, Gertrude by Hermann Hesse. First book of Hesse's published in English, but definitely not the first that I've read. It's actually the 8th Hesse novel that I've read and chatted here on my channel. I have previously read and chatted Steppenwolf, The Glass Bead Game, Demian, Siddhartha, Rosalda, Narcissus and Goldman, and Beneath the Wheel. And so I will link to those chats down in the details below. But what this one is about an artist, so kind of a common theme in Hesse's novels, right? An artist whose name is Kuhn, and this is sort of a fictionalized memoir of his life. He's looking back over his life and career because he's a celebrated composer, becomes a celebrated composer, but he didn't start out that way. He started out as actually the son of a wealthy merchant whose father is sort of understanding, sympathetic figure. His mother, though, is rather cold and distant. So sort of the first obstacle he has to overcome is like his artistic nature versus the world of business, which I think the expectation it would be that he would enter into some sort of endeavor like that. But nevertheless, he wants to. He's really drawn to music. His first love is described in the book sort of early on. He falls in love with, she's kind of just a flirt, she's kind of shallow, flirtatious kind of girl, but he becomes enamored with her. It doesn't end that well for him, though. Ultimately, he has an accident which leaves him with a physical disability that he will have then for the rest of his life. But that accident really shifts his perspective of life because he suddenly becomes this sort of outsider with this disability. And so that is explored here. But ultimately, he does sort of, his father okays him to study music, which he does. And through the course of that, he makes some compositions. He ends up meeting who is to become his best friend, whose name is Moth, who is a rising star, rising tenor in the world of opera. And he also meets a young woman, Gertrude, of the title. Gertrude is the daughter of a wealthy patron of the arts, and she's also somewhat of an accomplished singer herself. So these two relationships, Muath and Gertrude, are really two of Kuhn's most important adult relationships that he forms. He has some others, though, and that we meet in the book. But Muath is sort of the opposite, really, of how they're all creative people. Kuhn, the main character, as well as his best friend, the opera singer, and Gertrude. But they approach this creativity in different ways, and that's explored in the book. Now, ultimately, Kuhn actually falls in love with Gertrude. She doesn't return that affection, though. She instead falls in love with the best friend. So there's this sort of love triangle that's going on throughout the book, or throughout most of the book. That's the general sort of plot. Is just Kuhn looking back on his life, his sort of artistic life he had, and the journey he had from his younger years throughout then into his mature years. But just some themes that I took away from the book. One is music itself. And so, the way that Kuhn interacts with music and what music means to Kuhn, I think is really cool in this book. There's a quote that really expresses this. It says, "A melody breaks upon you. You sing it, not with your voice, but with your soul. It saturates your very being. It takes possession of all your strength. For a few minutes, it extinguishes all that lives in you. All the non-essentials, the evil, the gross, the sad. It puts you in tune with the world. It makes the heavy light, and it lends wings to the motionless. All of that can the melody of one folk song do. I thought that was so cool because he's saying that music's really important in life, especially to him, but in everybody's life, he thinks, because even for just this few minutes, but that brief time can really make all the difference. And I think another important theme that I took away from the book was this realization that Kuhn comes to understand that the creative life, to live the life that he wants to lead is going to require him a bit of loneliness, right? Because he needs to concentrate on his creativity and not so much just sort of the diversions that many people go through life, just life as a diversion. He's not doing that. He's trying to create something. He understands that, and there's a quote, and I think this quote really illustrates that. And it says, "And even at that time, I comprehended a little of the truth that a real creative work demanded something of loneliness in one, a renunciation of some of the pleasures of life." This comes to be a hard lesson for him to learn, because there's a couple of different ways that this loneliness can be addressed, and it can result, in the case of Kuhn, actually in a sense of alienation from society, alienation from others, and then in the case of his friend Muath, who sort of, I think, reacts to this loneliness, or this sort of that sort of detachment from diversions in kind of a destructive way, especially with women, that we see in his relationships that he has with several women in the book, including Gertrude, the title character. But ultimately, Kuhn meets a person who kind of can serve as a teacher, sort of diagnoses this loneliness and this sense of alienation. And this teacher tells him, "You have a sickness, which is very much the fashion now, and which one meets every day in intelligent men. It is akin to moral insanity, and can also be called individualism or imaginary loneliness. For one who once has this illusion, a few disillusions are enough to make him believe that between him and others there are practically no connections, but great misunderstandings. It ensues, too, that such a sick person becomes proud and thinks all other normal people understand and love one another." So this sense of alienation, where it leads a person to, is to this sense that I'm different than everybody else, and nobody's ever going to understand me, and everybody else understands each other, but they don't understand me. And that is not true. And that is a lesson that that our main character here needs to learn. And further, on the advice of the teacher, which our main character ends up taking, the teacher, to sort of remedy this sort of sense of alienation, he says, "Try for a time to learn more of others and to think less of yourself. It is the only road to health. Particularly, you must learn to love someone so much that his well-being is more important to you than your own. You must not always think that another does not understand you. You should first seek yourself to understand others, to give others joy, to be just to others." Kuhn, our main character here, needs to learn this. He actually reaches out to his mother. Some circumstances have happened. His father has passed away, and he reaches out to his mother, who he has never had a good relationship with, and tries this on her, reaching out to her with understanding and putting her needs before his, and seeing how that works. So ultimately, in this journey we go on with this main character, he comes to the realization that both happiness and sorrow are a part of life that cannot be avoided. The very, very first paragraph of the book, as the narrator is reflecting back on his life, says, "My life, as I look back on it now, does not seem to have been a particularly happy one. Yet I cannot call it unhappy, in spite of my many mistakes. When all is said and done, it is very foolish to question so much about happiness and unhappiness," because he learns through the course of the book and through the course of his life. This is the very first paragraph, but we then see through the course of his story that he's telling us, that he comes to understand that it all sort of creates its own symphony or its own opera. We're all kind of in our own story, and what's unhappiness to us today won't necessarily be seen that way by us in the future. And the book actually closes with this thought that sort of, I think, magnifies that idea. And that is, as a man grows older, he is more at peace than in his youth. But I will not on that account slander youth, for it sings to me in all my dreams like a master song, and rings clearer and purer than ever it did in truth. I think that's so cool because, he's saying here that, as I've gotten older, I've become more at peace. He's become wiser. He's learned how to navigate himself in the world and also to interact with others and to seek the understanding of others and to understand others, actually, which is the harder work, actually. And he's learned this through his life. But he's saying here, so he's more at peace, than he was in his youth. But I think he's saying here, how when we look back on our lives, a lot of times, when what we think were the real struggles and the real sorrows, we know led us to where we are today, right? That we wouldn't be the person we are today if those things had not happened to us. If it hadn't happened to us the way that it did, we would be different. And so if one is reflecting back on their life and seeing it as this beautiful song, which he's sort of doing here, I think at the end, he is saying, my song wouldn't be this beautiful if it hadn't had all the happiness and the sorrows that I had in my life, I think is ultimately what he's saying there. So I thought that was really cool. Ultimately, I really did like this better than I had expected. I wasn't really sure about this one. It's an early work by Hesse, and so having read some of his other works like Siddhartha and Steppenwolf and Demian, I wasn't sure what to expect from this one, but it turned out very kind of small book, not too long, but kind of a lot of story packed in there that I really did enjoy. So I think I'll leave the chat there. My next chat is going to be some historical fiction from the Tudor era in England, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. So I will have finished this already. I will have a chat on it coming up soon. So until next time, take care. Bye.